Yeah, it's a big thing. Obviously, we've done a lot of work. The big, beautiful bill, the Working Families Tax Cut, all of our legislation has been geared towards the cost of living, affordability, bringing the cost of living down. We put in all those conditions in the economy to let it take off like a rocket, and we were doing that at the beginning of the first quarter, and then the Iran skirmish began. So when this settles out, gas prices come back down to earth. That means your grocery prices come down again because of transport costs and all the rest. It's going to be a big factor. The kitchen table issues are going to decide the midterms.
Can those things come down in time to help you out in the midterm?
Yes, we got plenty of runway. We have better candidates. We have a fundraising advantage. We're super excited about the midterms. I'm absolutely convinced that we're going to grow the majority, and we'll get this done and make history.
That's House Speaker Mike Johnson downplaying the conflict in the Middle East as the Iran skirmish and providing a very optimistic prediction for the midterms, despite President Trump's approval rating at near historic lows. Welcome back to Morning Joe. It is Monday, May 25th, Memorial Day. Richard Haas, Pablo Torre, and Ali Vitale are all still with us. And joining the conversation, we have retired CIA officer and MSNOW national security and intelligence analyst Mark Polymeropoulos and contributing writer at The Atlantic, Robert Kagan. Our thanks to you guys for joining us this morning. So the White House is pushing back against bipartisan criticism of a potential emerging deal to end the war in Iran. Regional officials tell the AP that under this proposal, the conflict would conclude and Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, as well as give up its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, with the details and timelines for that to be worked out during a later 60-day window. Now, Iran has not publicly committed to giving up that uranium, but the country's president told state TV that they were ready to, quote, assure the world that we are not after a nuclear weapon. But several Republicans took to social media over the weekend to speak out against this framework agreement. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas said that if the proposal allows Iran to continue to enrich uranium to eventually build a nuclear weapon and effectively retain control over the Strait of Hormuz, then, in Senator Cruz's words, that outcome would be a disastrous mistake. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, another Republican, he echoed that, writing that the rumored 60-day ceasefire would be a disaster. Trump's former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, denounced the proposal as not remotely America First, what earned him a expletive-laden response from the White House communications director. President Trump is working to fight that skepticism, saying on Truth Social that he instructed negotiators to, quote, not rush into a deal, and insisting that what's being worked on is the exact opposite of the nuclear pact that was agreed to under the Obama administration. We can fact check that as not being quite true. Trump added that the deal isn't even fully negotiated yet, so don't listen to the losers who are critical about something that they know nothing about. And this morning, in the last hour, Trump's gone back to Truth Social, again stressing the deal not done, again rebuffing any criticism of the talks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio added this defense yesterday.
Multiple political leaders, multiple presidents of the United States have all said the same thing. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The only one who's tried to do anything and has actually done anything about it in a real way has been President Trump. So his commitment to that principle that they'll never have a nuclear weapon shouldn't be questioned by anybody. And the idea that somehow this president, given everything he's already proven he's willing to do, is going to somehow agree to a deal that ultimately winds up putting Iran in a stronger position when it comes to nuclear ambitions is absurd. That's just not going to happen.
Mark Polymeropoulos, though, there is a good argument to be made that Iran is right now in a stronger position than it was at the beginning of the war, particularly with it now knows it has the ability to inflict severe economic pain on the U.S. and the rest of the globe by closing the Strait of Hormuz, which they can do at any time, it would appear, even if it now reopens in the wake of this deal. So what's the latest you've heard as to this? And we should note, President Trump is so obviously desperate to get out of this war. He continues to overpromise. This is like the third or fourth time, or 10th time, or 15th time, where he said the war is at its close. But Iran gets a vote, and we have not heard from Tehran yet that they've agreed to these conditions.
Right. So, Jonathan, it appears now this is actually just an extension of the ceasefire. I think when we use the word deal, that seems to indicate there's some kind of finality to it, and it doesn't look that way. But Yesterday on social media, you saw this kind of apocalyptic meltdown from those who are supporting the war and those who are in the Republican Party. And clearly, President Trump and his allies are pushing back right now. But I think the way to frame this is to take a look at or just ask several kind of key fundamental questions. First and foremost would be, is Iran, has their nuclear ambitions been thwarted? And the answer to this right now looks to be no. Think about their conventional military capabilities. Were they hit hard by the U.S. military? Of course they were. But do they still have ballistic missiles and drones? And the answer is yes. What about our allies in the region? Well, the Israelis are upset with us, and certainly the Saudis now are looking at other regional arrangements. So even our allies are not happy about how this has turned out. And then finally, what about the Iranian people? Don't forget, back on January 13th, Trump made that famous statement, help is on its way. The Iranian people are no closer to political and economic freedoms. And in fact, a deal which would provide economic lifeline, sanctions relief to the regime answers that question quite clearly. Perhaps the regime hardliners are more firmly entrenched. So if you ask those fundamental questions, you see why there is pushback from a lot of people.
So, Robert, your latest piece for The Atlantic is titled "Trump's Endgame is Surrender." And you write in part this: the outlines of President Trump's endgame in the Iran war are now emerging. Endgame, in this case, is a euphemism for surrender. Trump's repeated threats to resume attacks have proved to be bluffs. The leaders in Tehran have been calculating for 2 months that Trump would not launch another attack. And for that reason, they have made no concessions, despite the damage they suffered from 37 days of relentless strikes. Trump no doubt hopes that he can slip away without Americans noticing the magnitude of this defeat. Most likely, the new normal in the Persian Gulf will be chronic instability and frequent disruptions in shipping. That's what happens when the hegemon cedes hegemony. So, Robert, this is a great piece. You've written a few things in recent days that have really gained a lot of traction in foreign policy circles and the broader national discussion. Talk to us more, if you will, as to why you view this as a surrender, Trump not meeting the aims of this conflict. And I was really struck by your line, I just read it, about how Trump is going to probably claim a quick victory and then never talk about this again because he's so desperate to convince the American people that this actually wasn't a humiliating defeat.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, first of all, Trump has been making it clear he's been desperate to get out of this war for over 2 months. I mean, this war, from Trump's point of view, effectively ended on March 18th when Iran, striking back after a strike on their oil field, hit a major gas facility in Qatar, at which point Trump ordered the Israelis and the Americans to stop hitting Iran's energy targets, and basically has been afraid of resuming the war and escalating ever since. He's bluffed numerous times about doing something which apparently Americans have found persuasive, but the Iranians have not, and that's the key thing. The Iranians believe that Trump has been bluffing. They know how desperate he is to get out of this war, which gives them total leverage, and they therefore do not need to make any concessions at all, and they haven't made any concessions. And one reason, I think the reason why Trump doesn't have a deal right now is the Iranians have not even remotely agreed to all the things that Trump claims that they have. And so at the end of the day, Iran is going to wind up in control of the Strait. That is going to be a fundamental geopolitical shift in the region and in the world.
I want to stay in the region, Richard, because we heard Mark mention the Saudis, the Israelis, the reactions that they're having. In Robert's great piece, he mentions that a U.S. official described Netanyahu's reaction to this potential memo of understanding as his hair being on fire. And it's certainly not the first time that we've heard reports of private disagreements between Netanyahu and Trump on what the path forward with Iran should look like. So I wonder if you can just bring us inside the region into the ripple effects of this potential deal and what it might mean for our allies there.
Yeah, there's 3 big sets of losers that are local. One Mark just referred to, which is the Iranian people. The fact that we're now giving money to Iran or talking about it essentially unconditionally really helps the people who are running that country, who are no friend of ourselves or their own people. Second of all, Israel. Israel's an enormous loser here. Even though there was close tactical coordination with the United States throughout this war, the fact that virtually none of their priorities, ballistic missiles, drones, support for proxies, is part of any of these conversations, leaves Israel arguably worse off, because there's also going to be a ceasefire that ties its hand. Iran is going to be allowed some nuclear capability or potential down the road. So this is not going to, quote unquote, end the Iranian nuclear threat. Plus the U.S.-Israeli relationship, I think, is in worse shape as a result of this war. And then last but not least of the local countries, what we're going to see is the United States is going to basically hightail it out of here as soon as it can. And they're going to be left somewhat vulnerable against an Iran that has learned what it can do about the Strait, has a threat or the ability to attack their energy and water infrastructure. We're not in a position to defend these countries, so they're going to have to essentially find new arrangements or cut new deals. And the real danger, obviously, is they think about appeasing Iran, or some of them may, I think the idea that we have opened up, and I'd be curious what Bob thinks, the idea that the Saudis and others one day say, hey, the only way we can deal with Iran, if we can't count on the Americans, is we've got to think about nuclear weapons. That what we have done in some ways is sown the seeds of an even more dangerous Middle East. Bob?
Robert.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, just nodding in complete agreement with everything Richard just said. And I do think that you should not underestimate what a disaster this is for Israel. And I know Richard is not, but let me just add that because Iran is going to control who gets in and out of the Strait, and we've got to stop talking about reopening the Strait. The Strait's going to be open under new management, and the management is going to be the Iranian military. They're going to control who gets in and goes out. They've made it very clear, by the way, that they do not intend to allow vessels from countries that they regard as hostile to have any access at all, which means they're going to have leverage over every nation in the world, which means further that if Israel feels itself threatened by what Hezbollah is doing in Lebanon or what Hamas is doing in Gaza, and therefore they feel the need to strike at them to protect themselves, they're going to find that Iran then has the capacity to punish them by choking off access to the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore forcing other countries in the world to put pressure on Israel. Israel is going to find itself more isolated in this world than it has ever been before, and including, as Richard says, in the United States, where there is now, as soon as Trump turns his back on Israel, which he has to do in order to get out of this war, at that point, I think MAGA will follow him, and Israel is going to find itself with very few friends in the United States.
Pablo, in Robert's defense, I often find myself transfixed in agreement with Richard Haas, just helplessly nodding.
Yes. His Knicks takes have long hypnotized me. But Mark, I'm thinking, okay, it is worth re-stressing that Iran didn't have control of the Strait of Hormuz like this pre-war, and now they do. So enormous. And so now I'm wondering, okay, so this administration, how are they going to change the American perspective on what a disaster this was? And the name that comes to mind is Cuba. And I'm wondering how you process the idea of another military operation, a distraction in this hand, sort of taking us away from the Strait of Hormuz on the other.
So, Pablo, in my circles, the former intelligence officers, Cuba is actually something we talk about all the time because it's clear the administration has, telegraphed their interest in some type of regime change. But you also saw, as we talk signal versus noise, the signal is as follows. The CIA director, John Ratcliffe, made a visit to Havana. He actually took with him some of the individuals who were involved on the Maduro raid in Venezuela as a very specific sign. You see us putting secondary sanctions on the Cuban regime. So the economic squeeze is there. The real question a lot of us have, of course, is are we actually going to kind of get involved in yet a third military escapade? There was Venezuela, Iran. Are we really going to go into Cuba now with any type of military force? You have an aircraft carrier parked in the region, but it's a U.S. military that has expended a lot of ordnance. We do hear reports that, Southern Command is putting plans together, but I would be very surprised if there's any type of military activity. The economic squeeze, sure. But, for a candidate who ran on no more wars, never ending wars platform, are we really going to go to this hat trick of Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba? That's going to be something the American people, I think, really do rebel against.
Yeah, there certainly could be an attempt to change the narrative and stepping up the rhetoric and economic pressure towards Cuba. We'll see if they're willing to go further than that. Moving to another global hotspot now, Russia's military hit Ukraine with a large-scale drone and missile attack early yesterday morning, with explosions heard across Kyiv for hours. According to Ukraine's Air Force, Moscow launched roughly 600 drones and 90 missiles, including at least one powerful and rarely used hypersonic ballistic missile that's capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Ukrainian authorities say the attack damaged infrastructure across Kyiv, including residential buildings, schools, and a market, wounding at least 83 people. And Richard, much has been made of recently about how Ukraine seems to have more of the momentum in this conflict, Putin on his back heel, but shows here still has the ability to lash out, targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, even as there's some increased speculation that he might be willing to try to find a way out of this.
Well, I think he's going to have to find a way out of this. This is his war of choice. It has not gone well militarily. Essentially, it's a stalemate. Yeah, he can still inflict pain, and a cornered Putin, Jonathan, is a dangerous Putin. But the temporary advantage he got from the Iran war, the increase in energy prices and the rest, that's going to fade if and when things wind down there. And I just think what we're seeing domestically in Russia is a growing pushback, given the civilian casualties still going at roughly, 1,000 a day. It's a stunning rate of casualties. The economics of the war, really, the Russian economy is terrible. The demography, this is a shrinking country. So I think it's a question of when, not if. In a funny sort of way, Putin has to do some version of declare victory and opt for a ceasefire. He won't give up his goals versus Ukraine, but he will, I think, be pressured from within, because the only thing he cares more about than Ukraine is himself and staying in power and staying alive. So my own sense is, whether it's sometime this fall, I think we're going to see the beginning of the end of this phase of the Russia-Ukraine war.
Robert, your final thoughts of the morning. Pick your global hotspot if you'd like. What else are you thinking about right now?
Well, I'm thinking a little bit about East Asia and Taiwan and China, because one of the obvious consequences of this war is that the United States has pulled significant forces and capabilities out of the Western Pacific, which are designed to deal with a potential Taiwan scenario, and had to send them to the Gulf. So I think we have something like 2 and maybe a third rotating in and out aircraft carrier battle groups in the Gulf. We now have an aircraft carrier battle group to deal with Cuba. At some point, the U.S. military is going to be stretched thin. And I think that, unfortunately, is dangerous regarding both China and Russia. I'm not quite as optimistic as Richard is. And I'm also not convinced that Russia doesn't have other moves to make. They're doing a lot of interesting probing up in the Baltic space these days. And I wouldn't assume that is necessarily safe. But most of all, the United States has demonstrated that its military is stretched very, very thin.
Contributing writer at The Atlantic, Robert Kagan, thank you for joining us this morning. His new piece, an important one, available to read online now at The Atlantic. Retired CIA officer Mark Palmeropoulos, thank you as well. We always appreciate it. We'll be reading Mark's latest analysis online now. Still ahead here on Morning Joe, Texas voter. Americans' confidence in the economy has hit the lowest point in nearly 4 years. A new Gallup poll shows that just 16% rate the economy as excellent or good. 49% say it's poor. 76% say economic conditions are getting worse, the highest reading since 2023. Just 20% of Americans say conditions are improving. And Ali Vitale, at the top of this hour, we played some sound from Speaker Johnson being bullish about Republicans' chances this November. But we know that elections are often decided on economic issues, particularly midterms. And those numbers right there, very scary ones for Republicans.
Well, once again, the shoe is on the other foot. And this used to be an issue that Republicans had solid control and confidence in, led in part by President Donald Trump, who always was viewed as better on the economy. Certainly that manifested in voters' minds in 2024. We are never going to hear the speaker say, gosh, yeah, things really do look bad for us. Once he starts doing that, the whole ball game is over. He's still got fundraising to do. He's still got enthusiasm to keep high. But it's why private Republican sentiment is so instructive and often is. There is concern. There is hand-wringing over the fact that the Iran war has made it seem that the administration's focus is split, but that also it is having bottom line impact on what Americans are paying, for example, at the gas pump. But then also consider the way that Republicans left town just a few days ago for a week-long recess. They were supposed to pass this reconciliation bill that was going to be immigration-focused. It should have been quite simple. And then it became completely complicated by, are we putting $1 billion in funding for a ballroom into it? Are we giving $1.8 billion in potential slush fund forgiveness to January 6th rioters? All of that led to the potential for a veto threat if some of those priorities weren't included in what, again, should have been a simple reconciliation bill. It led to Republicans leaving town, not being able to do anything on another issue that was signature for them in 2024, which was immigration. And so there is this sense that they haven't done a ton with their majorities, but it is very key in the minds of voters that Republicans control not just the White House, but both houses of Congress. And that's going to stay in their mind as they question, are things better for me on the kitchen table issues that Johnson himself says are going to be decisive in these midterm elections? And we're going to watch as key constituencies that, yes, voted Republican in November question, are they part of that coalition permanently, or are they swing voters, specifically Hispanics in places like Texas, for example?
All right. Well, speaking of voters in Texas, we'll head to the polls once again tomorrow for the state's primary runoff elections. The National Democratic Party is taking particular interest in a very close race in the state's 35th district, naming one of the candidates, Johnny Garcia, to its very selective red to blue program. Despite that region undergoing redistricting in favor of the GOP, Democrats are hoping to flip the seat in November. And Democratic candidate for U.S. Congress in Texas, Johnny Garcia, joins us now. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us this morning. Obviously, Texas, as you well know, has long proved elusive for significant Democratic gains, whether it's the presidential, the Senate, or outside of a handful of House seats. And now we have this redistricting push. But talk to us, if you will, about the current state in Texas, because this was something that the Republicans there rammed through at the behest of President Trump. But yet there's a sense they actually may have weakened themselves in a number of places.
You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for having me on. And the numbers that you just showed clearly indicate the frustration that Texans are feeling here in this district, as well as folks across the nation. People that can't make it to the gas pumps to fill up their vehicles, people that want to be able to go to the grocery store here, especially in Texas. We just want to be able to go to H-E-B to buy our groceries, be able to pay our utility bills. And here in South Central Texas, families just want to be able to make it to Sunday to buy their barbacoa and Big Red. But unfortunately, Donald Trump's economy is making it harder for everyday Texans. And it's why we are seeing this swing come back to our party. Folks that left our party in 2024 are coming back. And we're going to see that play out here in November.
One of the things, looking at your bio, that is jumping off the page at me is that you had a former life as a hostage negotiator. And I'm curious how that informs your approach amid this high wire act you're describing.
Look, my time spent as a SWAT hostage negotiator was responding towards the sounds of chaos, staying calm under pressure, using words that actually mean things in public service when lives are on the line. And we know in this midterm election cycle, folks here in Texas are depending on strong Democrats to get the job done so we can make life more affordable, healthcare more affordable for folks that actually depend on it. And currently, this administration is holding the American economy hostage. And it's going to take a SWAT hostage negotiator that has dealt with these crises on the front lines, now taking this skill set with me to Capitol Hill.
I will say I often feel like a hostage on Capitol Hill sometimes, so we might need what you're bringing. At the same time, when I was down in Texas back in February reporting on the Senate race, as I was talking to voters, Republicans and Democrats alike, it did feel like this race was hinging on national issues more than sometimes these races, which tend to be more local. I wonder if you agree with that assessment and the ways in which you see Republican policies from Washington trickling in and how voters are thinking about it in a district that, in theory, should be weighted to Republicans by about 10 points.
Look, y'all cover it every single day. The broken promises this administration ran on. We're seeing them fail us here in Texas. We're not seeing the prices of everyday goods go down. We're definitely seeing gas prices skyrocket. And that's what is driving the frustration. I talk to folks at these forums that we're speaking in the communities, and I get off stage and I'm immediately rushed by folks that are saying everything that you're talking about is refreshing to hear from a Democrat. And I think that I have their trust and support. And I asked them, hey, look, I'm going to need your trust and support in your vote in this runoff election. And they're saying, sorry, I can't vote for you. And I said, well, thank you very much. Can I have your trust and support in November? And they say, absolutely. Look, this Republican Party is doing nothing good for us. And that's why we're seeing this shift from not only Democrats, independents, but also Republicans here in the state that are frustrated.
So, Johnny, there's obviously a lot of frustration with Republicans across the country and even in Texas. But Texas, as we know, traditionally a red state. So if you were to be elected, though, in November, what are some issues where you would work across the aisle and try to make deals with Republicans?
Look, it starts, y'all mentioned this $1.8 billion slush fund is a complete slap in the face to public safety. My fellow brothers and sisters who have laid their lives down on the line to keep our communities safe. We need to bring back some common sense, pragmatic approaches to Congress. And what we're seeing right now when Medicare and Medicaid is hurting folks that need and depend on reliable health care in this district. Speaking to a gentleman a couple of weeks ago, he told me that he went from paying $75 a month on his COPD medication that he was using to help fight his cancer, lapse to and expand up to $200 immediately when the subsidies lapsed. These are the everyday issues families are facing here in Texas, such as my sister, who went from paying $100 a month on healthcare to $200 per paycheck. These are the everyday issues that we have to bring back and make life more affordable here in Texas for everyday families.
Democratic candidate for U.S. Congress in the state of Texas, Johnny Garcia, thank you and good luck. Coming up next on Morning Joe, Pope Leo. Beautiful live look at Vatican City, where Pope Leo this morning presented his first major teaching document, a landmark encyclical focused on the preservation of human dignity in the face of artificial intelligence. Titled Magnifica Humanitas, the pontiff's letter comes amid growing backlash to AI's environmental, educational, and social impacts. Pope Leo, who has been outspoken about AI's potential to infringe on human values, was joined by leading Catholic figures, along with Chris Olah, a co-founder of the AI company Anthropic. Joining us now, publisher of the world's most read newsletter on the Pope, titled Letters from Leo, Christopher Hale. He's also a Democratic strategist who has worked for both President Obama and President Biden. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Pope Leo, in his short time in office, has become almost a remarkable, in some ways, political figure, and his voice carries real weight around the globe, of course, but here in the United States as well. Give us some background here. Why did he choose AI as such a central early topic?
Really, AI was a central theme for the Vatican well before Leo was elected. Really, for about a decade now, the Vatican has really taken this topic head on. Well, let's be real here. Pope Leo is actually the first pope to really own a cell phone, to use a computer. You might see that he has an Apple Watch. So he's really a pope that understands technology in the flesh. He also is a big consumer of Western media. He watches MSNOW, he watches CNN. So he's really involved in the realities of modern technology and modern life. So when he was elected, days after he was elected, he made it very clear that he thought AI was one of the perennial and pinnacle issues of his papacy. And in 135 years ago, his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII, wrote an encyclical called Rerum Novarum on new things that addressed the Industrial Revolution. And Pope Leo XIV thinks that AI represents today, in 2026, what the Industrial Revolution, what the steamship represented in 1891. So this is what he thinks is the pinnacle issue of our time. So it was very clear that he wanted to take this up. And with this document today, 184 pages, he's given us a lot to look at.
So talk a little bit about what he's saying on this issue. You've talked about it as a populist statement. And it strikes me that, A, you have an American pope who is saying this. I think that's notable and important, and we should talk about it. But the other piece of it, too, is it feels like the pope has a better handle and frame on the issue of AI than either, say, U.S. political party at this point, too.
Well, I think that we oftentimes in the United States talk about things as policy issues first and foremost. And he, of course, sees it as a moral issue. He opens this document for your biblically inclined people. He opens this document saying that the choice facing humanity is the Tower of Babel. or a civilization of love. And Tower of Babel, for a little refresher, is in the Old Testament. There was an attempt to create this tower of information, of knowledge, to essentially recreate God, and it tumbles on top of itself. And I think Leo XIV actually thinks that that's what's going on in Silicon Valley. He actually views this as an attempt, at its worst, to recreate God. And Peter Thiel seems to buy into that argument in some ways. He says that those who counter AI, who want to slow down the AI, are tools of the Antichrist. And he actually name-checked Pope Leo XIV last fall as the woke American Pope, and had concerns that Leo XIV would take this issue on, and of course he has today. So I think this moral framework is something that Silicon Valley has been afraid of. I think one thing to note with Pope Leo, he's not tendered to the American politics. You can't tariff him, you can't impeach him, you can't indict him, you can't remove him from office, you can't deport him, and I think that makes it hard to deal with.
Yeah.
It's Richard Haas here. To the extent the Pope is worried about the consequences of AI, what is his sense of essentially, if you will, the politics and what to do about it? Is he hoping that those who run these companies self-restrain? Is he hoping that government steps in, the U.S. government? Is he hoping that the United States and China reach some kind of understanding, as perhaps idealistic or far-fetched as that might be? How does he go from the conceptual to the operational here?
I think on all three, the answer is yes. He believes that he wants AI to play a specific role in this companies himself. Christopher Olah being a part of this presentation this morning is historic and strange. We don't have secular leaders participate in these presentations. And the fact that, of course, Christopher Olah and Anthropic got into a fight with the Pentagon and was basically blacklisted by the White House, I think he found that to be courageous and willing to stand up to government. But he also thinks that government itself has a significant role to play. One of the things I'll note is the document is 184 pages. Most of it's not theology. There is theology, of course. There is moral components. But he talks a lot about the practical realities of AI, and he's really concerned about the use of AI in war. And that's where he spends the most of this document talking about. So I think Christopher Olah's presence today is in fact, perhaps the most important story besides the encyclical itself. So he does believe that the builders of AI and the government has a co-responsibility in protecting and safeguarding humanity.
You know, Christopher, one of the other points that Pope Leo makes is about the social role that AI will leave humanity with. And this notion that, I'll just quote it, a society that guarantees employment to only a small fraction of the population despite having a high level of technical development risks exposing many to forced inactivity, a lack of responsibility, and the absence of daily tasks and stimuli, resulting in human and cultural impoverishment. And I'm just wondering how that lands in Silicon Valley and who he's communicating with there, because that seems to be an appeal to everybody.
Yes, I think he's communicating really to a populist movement that's growing across this country who is skeptical of artificial intelligence. One of the weaknesses of this populist movement that is rising is there's a lack of moral language around it. I think there's a lack of common language around it. For Leo XIV, first and foremost, this is not a political issue. This is not a policy issue. This is a moral issue, and it actually it precedes religion itself, and it's the question of human dignity and what it means to be human. And I find that this language really resonates in middle parts of the country. When you talk about people standing up against like AI data centers, I think that they'll look to this American-born pontiff, to this Pope from Chicago, as a moral leader to give them the language, the grammar to talk about these issues. And I think that's actually the power of this document, is that it will be used in the months and years to come by the people engaging these issues across this country.
Fascinating conversation. Publishers of the Letters from Leo newsletter, Christopher Hale. Christopher, thank you for joining us this morning. Up next here on Morning Joe, we're going to dig into an effort to block a Florida airport from being renamed after President Trump, amid new reporting on how Trump may profit off the aforementioned name change. That's straight ahead here on Morning Joe. Welcome back. Now to some other stories making headlines this morning. There is a new legal fight in the effort to rename a Florida airport after President Trump. A Democratic congressional candidate is suing Palm Beach County to stop all spending related to the renaming of Palm Beach International Airport. This follows recent reporting on just how much the Trump family stands to gain from the name change. As The Guardian notes, under the agreement between Palm Beach County and Trump's licensing company, the president will get to choose exactly which vendors manufacture and supply branded merchandise to the airport, even as the deal technically bars him from, quote, direct financial compensation from goods sold at the airport. Furthermore, Trump can monetize the airport's new name in any way he sees fit and has final approval over how his likeness is portrayed and presented at the airport. A note, the families of President Reagan and Kennedy do not profit off of the airports named after them. Meanwhile, the Ebola outbreak in eastern Congo is becoming more difficult to manage after an attack on another hospital yesterday. That's the third in the last week. A group reportedly stormed the facility, demanding the bodies of two deceased relatives be handed over to them, while medical staff were forced to evacuate amid gunfire. Congolese authorities have tried to limit access to the bodies of Ebola patients, which can remain highly contagious even during funeral preparations. The government there suspects that more than 900 people are infected with Ebola and attribute at least 119 deaths to the outbreak. But those numbers are believed to actually be much higher, as the virus likely spread for weeks before health authorities became aware of the growing outbreak. And as Memorial Day weekend marks the unofficial start of summer, though a very rainy one here in the Northeast, health experts this morning are warning about the increasing risks of tick season, now already well underway. MS Now reporter Britt Miller has more.
It all started with a simple dinner, a hamburger, a hot dog, and a drink. But 5 hours later, Asa Grunenwald knew something was wrong.
I ended up scratching my chest, and I saw that I had hives all over, and I started to develop felt like a dry cough, and I was not sick at all. And so we decided to call the ambulance.
A blood test found the Long Island baseball coach had alpha-gal syndrome, making him allergic to red meat. What makes this food allergy unique is it's triggered by a tick bite from a species typically found in southern states. And now it's in the Northeast.
Alpha-gal is short for something called galactose alpha-1,3 galactose. This is a carbohydrate that's found on the cells of all 9 non-primate mammals. When people get bitten by the Lone Star tick, a subset of the population will make an allergy immune response to the saliva, because the tick saliva also contains alpha-gals.
Dr. Aaron McGinty has treated Asa since his reaction a year ago. He's one of her nearly 1,200 alpha-gal patients in Suffolk County, an area with the highest number of suspected alpha-gal cases in the country, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But not everyone who tests positive will develop this allergy. If they do, reactions can happen up to 8 hours after eating something like beef or pork. Symptoms may include hives or dizziness, and in rare instances, they can become deadly.
When all of those symptoms happen together, we call that anaphylactic shock, and that is the scariest thing that can happen.
In 2024, a New Jersey man with alpha-gal syndrome died after eating a hamburger, and it was recently discovered an Australian teen died from this meat allergy.
They call it a consistently inconsistent allergy, where the risk is there, even if it doesn't happen every single time.
But she says it can go away over time if people avoid additional tick bites. Still, the CDC identified more than 110,000 suspected cases from 2010 to 2022, but as many as 450,000 people may be affected in the U.S. As the deer population continues to grow, alpha-gal and Lone Star ticks are spreading. Here in New York City, officials say 300 people have tested positive since 2024. Over in Massachusetts, officials there just started collecting data. It's now one of at least 12 states with laws requiring cases to be reported.
We're absolutely concerned that this tick, due to warming climates and, environmental conditions, is going to continue to move northwards. And so more and more of Massachusetts might become affected.
Martha's Vineyard has seen a twofold increase in positive tests from 2020 to 2025. But back in New York, Asa is hoping to test the waters this summer.
I'm anxious about it because I'd like to be able just to go out and eat the things you'd like to eat without worrying about it.
In the meantime, doctors say to protect yourself, avoid ticks and wear repellent. Britt Miller, MS Now.
Our thanks to Britt Miller for that report. Still ahead here on Morning Joe, we'll turn back to the uncertainty surrounding negotiations with Iran, as there is bipartisan criticism to what could be included in a potential deal. That's straight ahead here on Morning Joe.